For Rand, the theme of Atlas Shrugged was the role of the mind in human life. It's how the mind is what guides wealth creation, and what egalitarians demands at the end of the day. It's how they achieve the equality they want is for you to shut off your mind. It's to turn it off, stop creating the wealth so you can become like everybody else. And that means we're all poor, we're all miserable, we're all suffering, we're all oppressed.
My name's Max Gagliardi, and this is Always Be Building. If you're watching this video, take a moment, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, or you can follow me on your favorite podcast app. Hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Sure. Thanks for having me on.
I've been a big fan of your work. I read your book back in, I think it was 2016 or so when it came out. And that was kind of what sent me down a little bit of the libertarian rabbit hole. I ended up reading Ayn Rand after that, and a couple of her books, and guys like you, and have been a fan of guys like John Stossel and Alex Epstein, just guys that I feel like, Alex, especially on the energy side, which is my background. And so been a huge inspiration on that stuff. And I'm happy to have you on. I'd just love to hear how you got to where you're at, what you're doing with the Ayn Rand Institute, and just some of the backstory that led you where you are today.
Sure. I mean, in a sense, it's a long story, but, I read Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged when I was 16. I was living in Israel at the time, and like most Israelis back then, I was a socialist. I was a collectivist. I was everything Ayn Rand is against. And Atlas Shrugged just blew my mind. It basically changed my life. It convinced me that I was wrong, and set me on a path that I'm still on, I guess, today. And the path was to really try to understand her ideas, apply them to my own life as the main priority, and then to apply them to my understanding of the rest of the world and what goes on in the world. So I spent a lot of years studying those ideas while pursuing a career. I was an engineer for a while. I got an MBA, a PhD in finance. I was a finance professor. But ultimately was offered the job of running the Ayn Rand Institute in 2000. And ran it for 17 years as the CEO. Hired Alex into the Ayn Rand Institute, and so started him off in his career as an intellectual. And ultimately, today I'm the chairman of the board of the Institute. I have the Yaron Brook show, which is my podcast, my YouTube channel. Write books and try to get the ideas. Try to take those ideas that I learned from Ayn Rand and apply them to the world today, and apply them to current events and what is going on, and to try to have an impact. I think the world's heading in the wrong direction, and we need to work to try to turn it around.
I think you are having an impact, or at least you have on me. And I think that a lot of the things that Ayn Rand talked about in the book Atlas Shrugged, and just as well as some of her other speeches, it's kind of eerie when you look around today and see some of the things that are going on and the way things have played out. Especially with the youth, which I want to get into later. But I think first, just kind of on the theme of equal is unfair, it's a huge topic. People talk about income inequality, and they talk about the wealth gap, and you see this all the time. And it's not just income. It's no matter what, pick it. It could be gender inequality. It could be race. It could be whatever it is. But inequality in general is a huge topic. Talk about inequality. Is it a bad thing? And just your thoughts on it. We'll kind of lead it from there.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is a consequence of kind of bad philosophy over the last 200 years, and has culminated, I'd say, over the last 40 to 50 years in a kind of in the elevation of a philosophy of egalitarianism as a moral ideal. It's kind of communism. It's kind of Marx, kind of out of Marx, but in many respects, it's worse. And it takes the ultimate ideal of equality to its logical conclusion, which is pretty destructive. But egalitarianism unfortunately has become the dead end philosophy of the left, and nobody, and sadly, there's really nobody to challenge it, because in order to challenge this philosophy, you have to have an alternative, and you have to have an alternative view of man and of the world, and of wealth, and just of society more broadly, and the individual. And sadly, most people on the right don't have that. I mean, the best you get is, I don't know, Jordan Peterson talking about lobsters. And with all due respect to Jordan Peterson, human beings are not lobsters. And so it's an easily refutable argument. We have the capacity to think. We have the capacity to, in some respect, override kind of the biological instincts that animals have. We don't live that way, and therefore, why not? Why shouldn't we all be equal? So there's a certain appeal to it, particularly in rich societies, where it seems like everybody's rich, so why can't? Oh, a lot of people are rich, so why can't everybody be rich? People have no clue where wealth comes from. People have no clue why some people have wealth, what the source of that wealth is, and why can't we just have everybody be happily wealthy and happily rich? And of course, the more aggressive egalitarians and the more honest ones, if you will say, well, that's not even enough, because even if we're all equally rich, some of us are more handsome and some of us are smarter and some of us are this. How do we get rid of all the inequalities? And you see that in the modern left and the intersectionality and CRT and a lot of these movements, that it's not enough just to get the equality of money. It's they want somehow to make us all the same. The fact that we're different is what really offends them and upsets them. So this is the logical conclusion of a long philosophical line that goes back 200 years and really goes back to some extent to Christianity. Ayn Rand is opposed to this and is opposed to it philosophically, partially to a large extent because Ayn Rand focuses on the individual, not on some societal outcome, not on some societal utopia, but on what is good, what is right, and what is the nature of the individual. And once you take that perspective, then you start from the point of we're all different. Each one of us is different. Each one of us has obviously different genes. We each one of us are born in different environments, but most importantly, we all make different choices. We have free will, again, which a lot of people, both on the left and the right, deny. The egalitarians deny it, but so does somebody like Jordan Peterson in the end. But we have free will. We make our choices ourselves, and therefore we do build it, right? To paraphrase Obama's famous speech, you didn't build that. But that's a rejection of free will. His whole speech is based on the idea that we're just automatons determined by our genes, our environment, and therefore don't deserve what we get. But Rand emphasizes that we do have free will, and the primary manifestation of free will is in the choice to think or not to think. It's in the choice to be rational or not to be rational. And at the end of the day, all wealth, all success, all values ultimately come from rational thought, from our capacity to reason, and in that sense, from those people who choose to activate their rational capacity, rational faculty. So entrepreneurs who build stuff and create stuff and change the world, and yeah, they make a lot of money if they're successful. That is not because they take risk. It's not because they work harder than anybody else. It's because they're using their mind in a unique way that creates huge value for lots of people, and that facilitates them becoming wealthy. So, when you take that away, when you take away their capacity, you limit their freedom. You take away their capacity to think and to pursue their own thoughts and their own values. You take away wealth creation, and you destroy the world. And in that sense, that's what Atlas Shrugged is about. Atlas Shrugged, for Rand, the theme of Atlas Shrugged was the role of the mind in human life. It's how the mind is what guides wealth creation, and what egalitarians demands at the end of the day. It's how they achieve the equality they want is for you to shut off your mind. It's to turn it off, stop creating the wealth so you can become like everybody else. And that means we're all poor, we're all miserable, we're all suffering, we're all oppressed.
Yeah. And that was really powerful. And I think a lot of the things you said, I agree with very much. And I think that there is this idea on the other side that it's this altruism. It's this, we want to make the world better. We want to help people. But ultimately, like, this idea of doing what's best for yourself. And some people say greed is bad. Some people say self-interest is bad. But explain why those things are important and how, when I look at my own life and my family, it's like we're a minority. Like I'm the biggest minority as you as an individual, and it's like, this self-interest thing. It's demonized, but talk about the self-interest and why that's important.
Look, the fundamental unit is the self, and at the end of the day, all you have is you. You are the unit that's alive. You are the unit that's conscious. You are the unit that you have control over. You don't have control over other people's choices, other people's consciousness, other people's lives. And you are the being that needs to survive, that needs to thrive, that needs to live a good life. That is in your control. And for Rand, the moral purpose of your life is to take on that control and to survive, to thrive, to succeed, to live the best damn life you can live. In this one opportunity that you have. And for her, that's what being self-interested means. It means taking your life seriously and living life to the maximum of your ability. And that means being rational. So for her, morality boils down to think about how to solve problems and how to live the best life that you can live. And part of living a really great life is like having a family and having somebody you love and who loves you and sharing a life together. But sharing a life together is not about sacrificing for the other people. It's not about self-sacrificing in the sense of giving and not getting anything in return. Those relationships don't work very well. It's about win-win. It's about creating a relationship that's win-win. And where both parties are benefiting, both parties' lives are better. That's what love at the end is. Love that works, a loving relationship that works is a relationship of mutual benefit. It's a relationship of, to put it in commercial trade, it's a relationship of trade. It's a win-win relationship of trade. So it's not like because you're self-interested, you don't care about your wife. It's the opposite. Because you're self-interested, you care a lot about your wife, right? Because she's an important part of your life and you gain a huge amount of well-being from her well-being. So you care about her well-being. But that doesn't mean you sacrifice for her. It doesn't mean you're living for her. It means you're living for yourself. That's why you care about her. So, this whole idea of love is selfless. I mean, Rand uses this example. Imagine you go up to your wife to be on the night before your wedding, and you say, "Look, I'm not marrying you for me. This is a sacrifice, right? I'm doing this for you." I mean, she'd slap you in the face, right? What you should do is go to your future wife and say, "This is the most selfish thing I've ever done. I'm marrying you for me because the way you make me feel." You make me want to be a better person. You make me a better human being, and I want to be with you for me. That's a healthy relationship. So that's what self-interest really means. It means orienting the way you think about the world in terms of your own values, in terms of your own well-being, but doing it rationally, not emoting, not whatever you feel like doing, not whatever, not whenever you pleases you in the moment. That's not true self-interest. True self-interest is thinking through what is really good for you over the span of a lifetime. And then altruism is the exact opposite of that. Altruism is not about being nice to people. It's not about caring about people. It's not even about wanting the world to be a better place. Altruism is about self-sacrifice. Altruism is about giving of yourself with no expectation of return. And the more you give, the more you suffer, the more you're trodden on, the more virtuous you are. And Rand rejects that as evil. It's like, why? Why self-sacrifice? Why get trodden on? Why live for other people? I mean, caring about other people, if they're worthy of your caring, is okay, is good, right? But they have to be worthy of it. And caring about humanity in some sense, caring about human beings is good. We care about life. We love life. Life is a value, after all, for a rational being. So we care about human beings, but not to the point where I'm willing to sacrifice. And, I care about human beings that are close to me, that are important to me, that are values to me more than I care about strangers. So I save my kids before I save the strangers' kids in a fire. And I'm not embarrassed about that. I'm proud of that fact that my kids are more valuable to me than a stranger's kids, and I was focused on them. What altruism demands is that you save the stranger's kids first. But that's evil. That's wrong. That is anti-life. So the whole perception, the whole way in which the world is framed, the issues around self-interest, around altruism, is misconstrued. You know what the altruist wants you to believe, what conventional philosophy and conventional morality and conventional political theory wants you to believe, is that there are really two options in morality. Either you sacrifice yourself to other people, you are exploited by other people, you live for other people, or you're a lying, cheating, stealing SOB. Those are the two options. And nobody wants to be a lying, cheating, stealing SOB, so we all want to be the sacrificer, and we can't. We actually live pretty self-interested life, so then we feel guilty about it, and we're torn internally. And Ayn Rand says, but wait a minute, there's a third alternative, and that is to live for yourself rationally, without sacrificing to other people, without asking other people to sacrifice to you, but just using your mind to live the best life that you can live. And that alternative is something that people almost never consider and never think of, and that the conventional way of thinking wants to reject and deny completely.
Absolutely. For sure. Back on this inequality side of it, if you look at nature, and I think you talked about this maybe in your book, or I've heard you talk about it before, you don't see a lot of equality. There's inequality kind of everywhere you look. And then when you look at the world, whether it's business or social things, I mean, what's really the only way that you can create equality in terms of outcomes? I mean, I've heard you talk about this before, but just the idea that we can force things to be there, it's like, I'll let you answer it without leading me.
Yeah, I mean, the only way to bring about equality is by use of force, by use of physical force. It's by taking from some and giving to others. So the only way to achieve equality, of material equality, of wealth, of money, is from taking from those who actually produce and giving it to those who don't produce. And now the Marxists tell you, well, the people who really produce are the laborers, the people on the line, and they get the least. But that's just false economically and philosophically. The people who most produce are the Steve Jobses of the world, the Elon Musks of the world. They're the people who come up with the ideas and then organize the means of production to make those ideas a reality. Those are the people who create the most wealth, and those are the people who are the richest in the world, and they deserve to be the richest. So the only way to get the rest of us to be as rich as Steve Jobs and Elon Musk is to go there and steal their money and take it by force, by using force. And we, mostly in society, we recognize that theft is wrong. Somehow theft is right if it's for a good purpose. It's for equality. But it's still wrong. It's still force. It's still violence against other people. And then, of course, what happens, and I often in my talks use the example of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, because in Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, it wasn't enough to make everybody equal materially. That was relatively easy to do. You make everybody really, really, really poor, and then everybody's equally poor. But then the Khmer Rouge are troubled by the fact that some people can read and some people cannot. Some people are educated and some people are not. Some people are smart, some people are not. Some people work hard, some people don't. What do you do about that? And the only way to solve that problem is to establish a lowest common denominator. How do you do that? The only way to do it is to what the Australians call chop down the tall poppies, just cut them off. In the Cambodia case, it meant just kill them. Kill anybody who had education, kill anybody who could read, kill anybody who was smart, kill anybody who worked too hard. Just shoot them. They killed almost 40% of their own population, 2 million people. It's killing fields of Cambodia. This is a real story. This is really what equality is about. These were the warriors of equality. This is what they stood for. To his dying breath, Pol Pot thought he was a good person as himself, because what was he doing? He was just following what all his teachers had taught him, striving towards achieving social equality. And that's what the advocates of equality today evade. They evade the fact that equality ultimately has to, this drive towards equality of outcome, has to lead to massive violence.
Well, I love that you took it there and with that extreme example, because I'm kind of a big history buff. I nerd out on a lot of history, and I look at the history of government, and you see the origins of it, and it's rooted in violence. And then I think about, and it frames the way I think about government today, even if it's something simple like a law that may seem benign. It doesn't seem like it's a big deal. People want to, and it happens on both sides, the right or the left. It's like somebody believes something should be a law or something should be passed, and we should regulate something, and ultimately, what does that mean? And to me, it feels like it means that you're willing to use violence to subject people to this. Because I mean, some people may say, "Oh, that's extreme. It's not violence. If you do it, you'll just get a ticket." Well, follow that trail, right? Like, what does it ultimately lead to? If you keep not doing that regulation or that rule, the end result is jail or something, bad happens to you, and it's like it's use of force. I mean, is that the correct way to characterize government ultimately? Like, people don't. I don't think people think of it like that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it was George Washington. I think in his second inaugural address, basically said government is force. Government is a gun. That's what government is. And it is. And the question then is, when is it appropriate to use a gun? Well, we all agree that it's appropriate to use a gun when you're defending yourself in self-defense. And if you take that and you say, okay, if government is a gun, then when is it appropriate for government to use that gun in self-defense, in defending its citizens? So the only job of government is the protection of its citizens, protection of the individual rights of its citizens. And for that, it has the monopoly over the use of retaliatory force, of force in self-defense, force in seeking out justice, in going after people who've used force first. The problem is today that government uses force to achieve, quote, social goals, to achieve equality, to achieve redistribution of wealth, to achieve, quote, fairness, to achieve, I don't know, all kinds of goals in terms of supposedly preventing companies from doing things the government doesn't want them to do through regulations. But it's all force. Every law that the government passes is force, it's coercion. And then the only question is it coercion in self defense, which is justifiable? Or is it coercion as a as initiation of force, which is unacceptable? And 90+% of what the government does today, or what the government adds to what it does today, is the initiation of force. It is penalizing me without me having done anything bad. Right? It regulates my business even though I have not committed any fraud. Like arresting me once I've committed fraud. That's what the government should do. That's appropriate use of fraud. Regulating me so that I don't commit fraud, not an appropriate use of government.
Yeah, it's also a good segue into government and some of the trends. And I work in the energy industry, and I see a lot of things that are happening that feel very collectivist in the undertones that are there. And I don't want to get into a debate on whether climate change and your beliefs on that, but just
Sure.
in terms of the movement and the ideologies behind it. If you look at a lot of it, it's kind of this utopian future that we want to build, where the world's going to end, and it always seems like it leads back to the government kind of socializing our energy systems. A lot of the policies and things that are being pushed forward are causing a lot of cost of energy to go up. I mean, look at the what's happened in Europe last year with this
Oh
energy
yeah.
crisis. You look at what's happening in the U.S. in a lot of areas. Do you see that with that movement and just kind of this collectivist undertone?
Oh, of course. I mean, it's unequivocal that the what really motivates the whole climate change debate, and what really motivates the push from the intellectuals, at least. I'm not saying that the common person who's concerned about environment and concerned about climate change is motivated by this, because I think they've been duped primarily. But I think the intellectuals, their primary motivation is a hatred of progress, a hatred of industrialization, a wanting to see massive redistribution of wealth, and viewing hysteria and panic over climate change as a means by which to bring about this redistribution of wealth, or the stopping of progress. There's a lot of hatred of technology, of success, of growth, of prosperity, of wealth, of being rich and human flourishing, that these intellectuals have embraced. They believe, in some sense, that human beings are uh, of original sin, that human beings are evil in some deep sense, and therefore, progress is inherently bad, and happiness is inherently bad, and human well-being is inherently bad. And they have figured out that a sophisticated way to stop this is, if all of our industrialization and our progress and our technology is fueled by energy, well, if we can just curtail energy, then we get to stop it. There's a big movement now in Europe called the degrowth movement. I give them credit for being at least honest about what their goal is. Their goal is to stop economic growth. They don't want economic growth. Um, there's a big movement now around climate change, that in order to get to net zero, we need to stop flying airplanes. Just need to stop using an airplane. So what? So you can't live in your little village without traveling and seeing the world? What's the big deal? They really want to take us back to the Middle Ages. That's really, they believe that kind of primitive life, in some deep sense, was better, and was more meaningful. People that had more meaning. Yeah, they also suffered and they died short lives, and most babies died when they were kids. I mean, it's just horrific to live back then. But they really, they'll never say it because most people don't believe this. But that's what motivates them. What motivates them is a real hatred of success and progress and industry and environmentalism. The whole climate change thing, to a large extent, is just the latest pseudo-scientific excuse for them to justify their horrific policies they'd advocate for anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy because to me, it's hard because we've got all these people in energy poverty today. Alex talks about this a lot. And then you've got these problems that we can't even solve the problems we have now, right? Like, but and we're worried about 100 years from now. And I think that's where, for a lot of people, I think it starts to break down, because it's like, it's one thing to say, we're going to enact this policy right now, and then tomorrow, this person right over here is going to get helped. They're going to be, and people can draw a line to that and say, well, we're going to sacrifice some, but it's going to help this other person. But this is literally just in some future world they're talking about, right? It's not even like we can draw a line to it.
And it hurts all of us. It's basically, it's not just that there's some people today that don't have enough energy. None of us have enough energy. It's not cheap enough. I mean, electricity in the United States should be a lot cheaper, should be a lot more plentiful. The grid should never go down like it does in Texas and California. We should have plenty of energy at a dirt cheap price. Our lives would all be better. It's not just Africa that is starved for energy. Every single one of us, in a sense, has less energy than we should have, given the technology that we have available today in the world. And what they want to do is they want to deprive us of this in the name of some mystical utopia that they've created. Somehow they are going to be these magical fairies that are going to deliver cheap energy from renewable sources that doesn't hurt the atmosphere and doesn't produce any carbon. And of course, as soon as that happens, if it ever happened, and as soon as that happened, that they will find some other human activity that they despise, and they will want to get rid of it. And of course, you can see that it's not enough for us not to drive or not to fly. They also don't want us to eat meat, right? And after we stop eating meat, what then? There's no end to how much they want to manipulate human life, because at the end of the day, what motivates them, again, the intellectuals, the people who really drive this movement, what really motivates them, what really drives them, is a fundamental hatred of human life. It's not about climate. It's not about this particular or that particular. It's this overwhelming hatred. And they want to present a utopia because that's the only way they can convince people that these are actions they should take. If they tell them, no, I'm really doing this because I hate you, nobody's going to buy into that, right? So they have to present it. And maybe they have to even convince themselves that they're not haters, that they really have this beautiful vision for humanity in the future. But it's just like the egalitarians. The beautiful vision for the future is really a nightmare that they are shielding, that they're pretending doesn't exist from other people and from themselves.
Even these conversations right now, if I put this on YouTube, it'll probably get some kind of disclaimer on the bottom of it. If I put it on LinkedIn, I'd probably get suspended for having this conversation. We haven't challenged the science behind climate at all. We've simply had a conversation around the ideologies
Yeah.
around it. And I think that this leads to my next question around this conflict that I have between the free markets and capitalism, but also this idea of government controlling free speech. And you've seen with like the Twitter files that these agencies are working very, very closely with these social media platforms. Now, the other side of the argument is that these are, companies. They can do what they want. It's their right to be able to censor people. How do you square those two thoughts with this idea of the government censoring people's free speech, but also the free market and these companies being able to do whatever they want?
Well, I square it, I think, fairly simply. Companies have the right to do whatever they want. Government cannot censor, and the Twitter files are condemnation of government, not of Twitter. Twitter's in this impossible situation. The government calls them up and says, "Hey, we want to talk to you." What is Twitter going to say? No, go stick it. They'll be shut down tomorrow. The government has a weapon. The government has a gun. So the enemy here is the government. The initiator force here is the government. The government is the entity that is censoring. So Twitter can do what they want, but we as intellectuals and we as voters and we need to stop the government from interfering in what Twitter and Facebook does. And Twitter and Facebook can discriminate in any way they want. Right now, arguably, Elon Musk is discriminating in favor of the right, and suddenly the left sees it that way. It looks like that way, right? So what? I mean, he owns Twitter. It's his company. He can do whatever the hell he wants. In my house, I don't invite communists for a cocktail hour. If I discover you're a communist, I ask you to leave. You're out the door. There's no invitation. Communists and Nazis are not invited to my house. So the same with Twitter. Twitter can decide whatever it wants. My complaint about Twitter and YouTube and LinkedIn and all is that their standards are not objective. They don't tell me in advance. Look, here are the things that are going to get you expelled. Here are the things that we don't allow. Here's the parameters. If they did that, then okay. Then I decide: do I want to use YouTube? Don't want to use YouTube? Want to touch these topics? Don't want to touch. But they have every right to do that. My concern about these platforms is that they have this vague language, and we as producers of content never know if we've crossed the line or haven't crossed the line. And then I just got 2 days ago. I got 2 or 3 days ago. I got 2 emails from YouTube saying we've taken these 2 videos off, and we're giving you you've violated our community standards, and we are sanctioning you. We're giving you like a red mark or whatever mark it is, right? 2 of these, and you're off the platform. And I looked at the videos and I said, where am I violating community standards in either one of these? And they said it's got to do with COVID, right? Your anti-COVID vaccines. You said something about the COVID vaccines that's not acceptable to us. And I went back to them and said, there's very few people out there who are more pro-COVID vaccines than I am. Not forcing people to take them, but the actual science of it, the medicine. And go check the video again, watch it again. And within 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes, they returned the videos online, and they took away my my black mark or whatever. What happened? I have no idea. And it's a black box. And that's my objection. But it's their platform. They can do whatever the hell they want. Just like in my house, I can do whatever the hell I want. And when the government intervenes, then they shouldn't. And we should attack the government. And I would love to see Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn and these other entities. I would love to see them sue the U.S. government over their First Amendment right, and sue them in court and argue that the government is trying to use them to censor American citizens. That would be the appropriate action. They don't do it because they know what will happen to them. They'll be dragged in front of Congress. And remember, both Democrats and Republicans hate big tech, and they threaten them constantly, and they hate these guys. But the answer is to hold the government to account.
Yeah, and there's some things that YouTube does that I think are decent, like the monetization aspect, and they have you go through there, and it's like, look, if an advertiser wants to pay and they don't want you to say certain things like bad language or violence or whatever, and you get to kind of select, does my video have any of this stuff? And then that makes it whether it's suitable for ads or not. I'm fine with that because those are advertisers. They're paying money. And if they don't want to have their money go towards something that you're saying that they don't like,
Yeah.
then you're signing up for it. It's straight. It's very black and white. It tells you what you can select. The part that I don't like is this arbitrariness that, like you've mentioned, where I get these things on Spotify, I get these warnings. Like we'll be talking about the oil market with some analyst, and he's like, "Hey, because of lockdowns could come back and." Demand could be low. And then I get some warning on my video being like COVID misinformation. And I'm
Yeah.
like, they didn't even listen to the video clearly. What do you think about the China TikTok thing? Do you think they really care about China spying on it, or they're just like, only we're allowed to do this? Like only we're allowed to steal your data, look at what you're doing. Or is it just, or do they really care about what China is? Because it seems like they're doing the same thing.
I think there's a sense in which both the Democrats and Republicans want a Cold War with China. They want to escalate. They want to make it worse. I think they believe, I think that the right probably thinks this through more than the left, but I think both parties believe that a Cold War with China somehow brings the country together. It gives us common purpose. It's like the old Soviet Union. Wasn't it great when we had an old Soviet Union? We all knew who the enemy was and we could all rally together and sing Kumbaya. So I think there's a certain element in both political parties that want to just aggravate the relationship with China as much as they can. And they want to bring it to Americans' consciousness and they want to turn China. I think China's a problem, but they want to turn China into an enemy at all costs. So is China using TikTok to spy on my TikTok watching habits? Maybe. Do I care? Not really. Do I care that the NSA is probably listening to our conversation or at least scanning it in some way? Our own agency? I care a lot about that because it's not about my TikTok watching habits. It's about ideas that I present, and I'm sure there's a file somewhere about Yaron Brook and his crazy ideas and dangerous ideas. Our government does it. Snowden showed us that our government does it. And it's much more dangerous when our government does it to us than when a Chinese government does it in a kind of what cat videos or what dance videos I watch. I mean, what is the information they're getting from TikTok? So I find the whole TikTok thing to be partially they want control over what we watch. They want control over us. And TikTok is low hanging fruit. They'd love to be able to ban certain things on Twitter. They'd love to be able to ban certain things on Facebook. They can't do that yet. But TikTok is low hanging fruit because they can pretend that it's a national security issue and they can convince people that it's a national security issue and use that to set a precedent that now they're determining the kind of social media we can use and what's allowed and what's not allowed. Who's next if they get to?
Okay, so a couple different ideas there. You talked about this wanting to spark the tensions with China and kind of this quasi Cold War idea to maybe drum up some nationalism there. But then there's also this idea of, and I've kind of seen this on both sides, is that sometimes it feels like they're kind of envious of China in some ways.
Oh, yeah.
Like the things that China does, it's like these politicians here, even the ones that are pretend like they're for free markets and open, all these, they're the ones even on the more freedom side skewed. It seems like there's kind of like an envy for what China's been able to do in terms of the level of control of the population around the messaging, around stuff that happened, like even with COVID. I mean, we kind of emulated a lot of what China did. It was sort of like, hey, we can do that too. Do you see any underlying envy from our politicians looking at the East?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question. Our politicians love the Chinese model. They love the idea of the Chinese model, the centrally planning, the fact that they get to control who gets the capital and which industries thrive and which don't. But they also, Donald Trump at some point said something like, how come when Xi comes into a room, everybody stands and nobody stands when I walk into a room, right? Like, or claps or whatever. Like he likes, he was envious of Xi because Xi got, quote, the respect, right? He was treated like, yeah, he was treated like an authoritarian. He was treated like and Trump would have loved that. He would have loved the pageantry of authoritarianism and the power that authoritarianism brings. So yes, I think both the left and the right in America today and in the West generally, you see this in Europe too, are jealous of the kind of power that Xi has and the kind of role the Chinese government plays in Chinese society, how little they are questioned, how little they're challenged, how few press conferences they have. I mean, what politicians wouldn't love to live in a world where they don't have to do press conference? They can just dictate to all of us. And you can see it in particularly on the right today, on how much the right today supports Putin and Russia. They love Putin. They think Putin's amazing. I mean, he's anti woke. That gives him huge amount of credit on the right, and he gets to do whatever he wants. He gets to dictate to the Russian people exactly what they should do. Isn't that amazing? So you see that on the right, certain admiration for Putin, which is really spooky.
Yeah, it is a little bit. There was a video today that was, I think, going viral about him talking about the anti-woke stuff, and people were like underneath it, saying that he's making a lot of sense. Speaking of Putin, there's a big war going on over there. It's kind of crazy right now watching it from the outside looking in. And again, and this is one idea that I've struggled with on the libertarian side a little bit, which is the isolationism, the staying out of these conflicts. I see all the points there, and I understand them, and I see the massive waste of money that goes into the industrial military complex. But, as a student of history looking back, has there ever really been a civilization that's prospered over the long term that wasn't kind of this aggressor that had their finger in wars all the time? That was sort of, that's when I look back at history, I'm kind of like, is it realistic to not be at some level in a conflict? Because most empires, they were in a state of perpetual conflict, which is why they were, they had the freedoms and the things that they had.
Sure,
How do you square those ideas and
but
think
also
about
they
that?
didn't have freedom, right? So it's hard to learn from history here, because the last 250 years are very different, because the United States exists. And look, let me just say, I'm not a libertarian. And when it comes to foreign policy and becomes to isolationism, I'm certainly not a libertarian, right? I believe the United States is basically a moral country, has been, with all its flaws, with all its problems. It was, and to some extent still is, the greatest country that's ever been. And it's different than other countries, because it's better, because individual freedom has been more respected here than anywhere else in history. And we're flawed. There's a lot that we could be doing better, but to compare us to Russia, to compare us to China, to compare us to even to pre-Enlightenment civilizations, you can't compare. There's no comparison. It's better to be in America than anywhere else in the world, and has been for the last 250 years. So America needs to defend itself. America needs to have a strong military. It needs to be willing to project that military when its vital interests are threatened. Now, we need to do a really clear, careful, meticulous job at defining what those interests are, so that we don't go running around the world becoming the policeman of the world. We don't go running around the world defining every little conflict as our interest. We have troops today in 120 different countries. I don't think our interests lay in having troops in 120 different countries. But I think we can clearly, we need to, and we should clearly define what our interests are. And these interests should be around protecting the individual rights of American citizens. They should be around protecting the life and property of Americans. So things like, we should be securing the shipping lanes of the world, because trade is crucial to American prosperity. We should make sure that if the United States is attacked by Islamists, for example, we should destroy whatever it takes in order to never have that happen again. Not build democracy in the Middle East, but certainly go to the Middle East, find the people who are responsible for this in every respect, and make sure it never happens again. So I am not a pacifist. I'm not a isolationist. But I am somebody who believes that America needs. I think I'm the true America first, right? In a sense that America needs to figure out what its interests are, what are the interests of its citizens, what does the individual rights demand, and then go out and achieve that as an act of self-defense, not as an act of aggression. Now, when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, there are a couple of things that you have to take into account. One is that whether you think we should be part of NATO or not, we are. We're a part of NATO. And being a part of NATO makes us, involved in and really care about what happens in Europe. The last thing America wants is to send its boys to die in Europe again, right? We do not want a war in Europe. And right now, if Russia invaded Poland or Estonia or any of these countries, we would be obliged to send our boys to fight for Estonia or to fight for Poland or to fight for Germany. Um, so anything we can do, uh, to stop to avoid that, and at the same time work to preserve liberty and freedom, we should be doing. So, if Ukraine is going to fight the Russians so that we don't have to, my view is let's support them. Now, I don't think we should be in NATO. I think Europe at this point is rich enough that they should be able to defend themselves. I think the United States should have a 4-year plan to get out of NATO slowly, let the Europeans build up their defense budgets. And so over time, I think the United States should disengage militarily from Europe, and let the Europeans defend themselves. But right now, we're part of NATO. And as part of NATO, I think we should be doing everything we can to allow the Ukrainians to crush the Russians, or at least throw them out of Ukrainian territory. Russia is the aggressor here. Russia is the bad guy here. Russia is the authoritarian state here. And the Russian-Ukraine war really is a civilizational war. It is a war between reactionary anti-Western forces, which Putin represents, and the appeal of the West, to some extent, the extent to which we all benefit from it today: liberty, freedom, democracy, or limited democracy. The sin that Ukraine committed, the reason Russia invaded, is that Ukraine was starting to look west. Ukraine wanted to become part of the West. Ukraine, and not just economically, they were looking to the European Union, but also culturally, they wanted to be more like the West culturally. If you went to Kiev, I went to Kiev quite many times before the war. I'd say between 2015 and 2019, I was there more than once a year. And Kiev was becoming a Western city. It was clearly abandoning kind of its Orthodox roots, its Russian roots. It was looking west, and that was the sin. And I think the West is better than Russia, and so I hope the West wins. And in that sense, I hope Ukraine beats Russia, and I think we should help them do it.
Yeah, and you talked about the NATO needing to take a bigger role. The U.S. It's costing a lot of money, and we're sending a lot of money over there. I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, but it's also, we've got the backdrop of the debt ceiling, and that's a hot topic right now. I'm sure it'll get resolved probably, but you're looking at this unending borrowing. You talk about inequality. If you look at what asset prices have done because of all the money that's been created, and what that's done in the wealth gap. Again, whether that's right or wrong, I'm just saying I think there's some causation there. And then you look at the entitlements, and so you got the military, you've got entitlements, and you've got now what's becoming a huge interest expense burden on this debt. And I think if you look at the real debt, including the entitlements, there was a recent Stanley Druckenmiller speech. I don't know if you saw it, but he said he estimates it at around 200 trillion in terms of what
between
we're on the
100
hook
and
to pay.
200 trillion unfunded liabilities that the United States government has taken on at the federal level. Doesn't even include the state and local levels. But look, of all the bad things that the government spends money on, I think defense is the least bad. The amount of money we spend on foreign aid, which should be zero in my view, is trivial. If you really want to cut government spending, you're going to have to cut entitlements. If you really want to cut government spending, you're going to have to cut all the discretionary stuff that the government shouldn't be spending to begin with. You're going to have to stop subsidizing business. You're going to have to stop the welfare state. You're going to have to stop the war on drugs. All these things that are completely irrational and self-defeating and self-destructive, you want to stop. And yes, and again, this is why I'm different than the libertarians. And yes, as part of that, you want to cut defense spending, but it's not my first priority. My first priority would be all these other things, and defense spending would be down the road. And with regard to NATO, my worry is less the money we spend on NATO. We spend a lot of money on NATO, but not as compared to the U.S. budget. It's not that much. My main concern about the NATO is that we're defending countries that can defend themselves, and we're putting the lives of Americans on the line, right? Your kids, my kids, might be called on to go and fight in Europe. Why? For what? Right? Let the Germans defend, and the Finns and the Swedes defend, their countries. They're rich enough. They're capable enough. There's no reason for the United States to be providing this kind of defense. And I support Europe. I think Europe is better than I'm a big supporter of Western civilization. I think Europe, with all its flaws and all its problems and all its evils, is still better than most of the rest of the world. Free countries generally are better than unfree countries. So I'm supportive of, Taiwan and South Korea and Japan and places in Asia that are free. We should be supportive of them. That doesn't mean we need to defend them. Why do we have troops in South Korea? South Korea is a rich country. They can fund their own defense. Why is America funding their defense? And why are we placing our kids, our military, their lives on the line to defend Koreans, where Koreans can defend their own lives?
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree with a lot of that, and it makes a lot of sense. It's complicated oftentimes when you get into the nuance, but the ideas make sense. Talking about the entitlements and the spending, like, isn't there like a private solution to this, a private way to do it? I mean, if you look at like what we've got left here, I mean, clearly it's going to be political suicide to cut anything off for this baby boomer generation. Like, it ain't going to happen. But can't there be some way, like starting with maybe the younger generation, to say, look, you're going to have to invest for your retirement. You're going to have to put into a plan. I mean, do you think they'll ever get somewhere like that? But the math says they kind of have to at some point.
Yeah, there are lots of solutions. And who said the baby boomers can't take a hit? Maybe they should, right? Baby boomers are pretty privileged in terms of the benefits they've received from government. Why shouldn't they take a hit? But let's assume even baby boomers don't take a hit. You have to, and there are lots of different proposals and different ways by which you privatize Social Security and ultimately make it voluntary, which is the way it should go. And even worse than Social Security is Medicare. Well, I mean, at some point, Paul Ryan and the Republicans proposed voucherizing Medicare, providing seniors with a voucher, then they use to go buy health insurance. And my view is that's the beginning. And then over time, you phase that voucher out to zero and make people save for their retirement, get people to save, get people to buy insurance, deregulate the insurance industries. The insurance industry starts offering us products like maybe lifetime insurance for health. All kinds of products could arise once they're liberated from government dictates and government mandates and government, coercion. So the solutions are always more freedom. Are we going to get to those kind of solutions? I don't know. I mean, it doesn't look very promising right now. And one of the sad things about the Republican Party, particularly the post-Trump Republican Party, is they don't want to talk about solutions. Solutions are off the table. All they want to talk about is attacking woke. All they want to talk about is attacking the left. There are no solutions. It's not like DeSantis, who announced as president yesterday, came out and said, "Here's my plan to save Social Security," because he knows that's a loser with the American public. Donald Trump has already said we can't touch Social Security, Medicare. We're gonna be the party that preserves them. Well, that's impossible. The math just doesn't add up, Donald Trump. So it used to be, before Trump, Republicans at least were thinking about it. They had ideas. They were proposing stuff. Now they've stopped thinking about it. They stopped proposing stuff. It's off the table. Generally, I'd say economic liberty is like priority number 1,777 on the Republican list of priorities. Economic freedom they don't care about it anymore. Maybe in energy, they're clearly better than Democrats, and clearly in energy is the one field that they seem to care about. But in any other respect, Republicans have no interest in economic freedom right now. They're not talking about it. They don't advocate for it. They don't lobby for it. They don't run political campaigns on it.
Seems to be the only bipartisan issue that they can agree on.
Yeah,
Is to
regulate
not
and
mess with
control.
these things.
Regulating.
Yeah, right. Speaking of regulation and control, one thing I have gotten more interested in over the last few years has been Bitcoin, and not because I'm some kind of crypto trader. I largely think crypto is a scam. Virtually all of it. I think the price of Bitcoin is very speculative. But I like the idea of a network that's monetary, that no one really controls, that people can send value peer to peer. Especially after seeing like what Canada did, which was just incredibly authoritarian during the trucker protests, where they were just shutting people's bank accounts off, arbitrarily. I haven't really heard you talk about it. Maybe I heard one show you did on it, but just any thoughts on Bitcoin specifically, not necessarily the crypto stuff.
Look,
but just this idea of it.
Generally,
Yeah,
I support all of that. I support financial freedom, which means You should be able to move money around, free of regulations, free of reporting to the government. Uh, the question is, does Bitcoin really provide that? And I'm not convinced. Uh, I have no interest in transacting in a unit that I don't know what the value of that unit is tomorrow. That the value of the unit is so volatile that from day to day you don't know what it's worth. Stability of value is one of the most important things for a currency to have, and Bitcoin has not achieved that. Maybe it will one day, but it has not achieved that. I don't think Bitcoin will be a solution ultimately, partially because I don't think the government will allow it. I think the government will find ways to shut it down, to regulate it, to control it, or to just ban it and make it fringe. It will be something we can use in the black market and not something we can actually use to change our lives. I don't think there are any shortcuts, in other words. I think the only way to achieve liberty is to achieve liberty. And to achieve liberty is going to be a hard fought battle. It's not going to be about using this technology, or using that technology, or using Bitcoin or not using Bitcoin. It's a philosophical, ideological battle that we are engaged in now and will be engaged in for the next few decades. And we better win, right? I don't think Bitcoin saves us from that as much as I wish it could. I wish there was a silver bullet that we could take. And I like the idea of this financial freedom. I just think, and I also think that in a truly free market, would Bitcoin win, or would somebody come up with even something better? My guess is somebody would come up with even something better. But what I want to do is get to the free market where let's compete and get government out of the monopoly over money.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I kind of view it like two paths potentially. Number one, I think overarching, they're going to tax it, and they already do, and it's treated horribly from a tax
Yep.
standpoint. If you spend it to buy something, you get
Yep.
taxed. They're also going to use it. I think there's actually one downfall of Bitcoin is it is very transparent, so they can track a lot of what you do with it because
Yeah.
it's all open. You can see it. But I kind of view it as like the internet. It's like the idea of sending it, and there's ways to use the network if you haven't got into the details where you can actually convert it immediately to USD and just use the network to send it, then it converts back. And like it's kind of like a network, right? And so I almost view it like maybe the internet with China. It's like we could go two paths. Like, do we want to go the China path where it's just, basically banned only what they want you
Yep.
to do? Or do we go the American path where there can be all this innovation and the free market can work its magic with it and use the tech? We'll see. And we're running close on time here, but I want to get the last question here is just kind of around the youth. And I think the stuff that you talk about is important. I'm not saying everybody has to agree with everything that you talk about, but ultimately I think these are important ideas. What do you think about the youth right now? It seems like they're seduced by a lot of this stuff that's the opposite of your ideologies, is the way you think, and what can they do to at least get educated on it?
Well, I think the youth has been seduced by the opposite ideas forever. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and there's never been a time where I felt like the youth was on my side or the youth was moving in my direction. Um, the youth is attracted to the dominant intellectual ideas in the culture. The dominant intellectual ideas in the culture right now from the left. The left has passion. The left has vision. The left has an agenda, a clear agenda. It's a horrible agenda. It's a horrible vision, but it's what attracts the youth to it. I would say that the real alternative to the left today is not the right. The real alternative to the left is Ayn Rand. And Ayn Rand provides kind of all those things that I think young people are looking for. They're looking for idealism. They're looking for a vision for a better world. They're looking for a vision for a better life for themselves. And I think Rand provides all those things. And I think that if young people are interested in anything that I had to say, the thing to do is go and read Ayn Rand. Go read Atlas Shrugged or The Fountainhead or Capitalism, Not Known Ideal or Philosophy, Who Needs It. And challenge yourself. These ideas are going to challenge you. These are not going to be conventional ideas at all, and they're going to challenge you. But there's a real opportunity here to broaden your horizons, and a real opportunity here to discover something that can really change your life for the better and change the way you look at the world for the better. And it's idealistic. It provides with a real vision for the future that is realistic. We just need to get the numbers. We need to get people, who embrace these ideas, and that's going to be a challenge. And it's going to take a long time to get to where we need to be. But truth, I think, wins out in the end.
I agree. I think truth should win out. I hope that it does. That's always been a mantra. It's like, if we can, I hope the facts matter. I hope the truth matters. Sometimes it feels like it doesn't, but I think that it does. And I think that Ayn Rand is important reading, whether you get done with it and you don't agree with everything, that's fine. I think it should be like required reading. And I'm glad that I've invested the time in it. You do a lot of interesting things. You mentioned some of them earlier, but last thing here, where's the best place for people to access your work and to enjoy your content?
Well, to find Ayn Rand, I would go to aynrand.org, AYNRAND.org. For my stuff, I mean, just Google Yaron Brook. There's a bunch of stuff, but YouTube, I've got a YouTube channel. I'm a Twitter. And of course, I've got 3 books. You can find them on Amazon: Equal is Unfair, Free Market Revolution, and The Moral Case for Finance. All those books on Amazon. So I encourage you to engage in the material and subscribe to my YouTube channel.
Yaron, thanks for coming on. I really enjoyed it. I
My
appreciate it.
my pleasure. Thank you, Max.